Welcome, everyone. A beautiful day to all of you. So wonderful to practice together. And this is the Sunday Sound of Dhamma. Para la comunidad hispanohablante, si hay alguna persona que desea escuchar la plática en español, hay interpretación simultánea, gracias a Claudia. Entonces se puede elegir eso en el menú. And for everyone else, English speakers, so good to see you. This is the Sunday Sound of Dhamma, and that means we will sit for about 10 minutes or so, and then I'll offer the Dhamma talk, and we'll have some time for Q&A and reflections at the end. And I thought that we just do a very relaxing kind of meditation today. Just really focused on relaxing the body and relaxing the mind. And as I often say, relaxation is one of the key factors for real insight and samadhi to develop. So it's good to learn how to do that. And I like to always begin with a bit of movement, a bit of rocking from side to side, moving the head, and from front to back. And allowing the body to come into a balanced, upright posture. Relaxing the belly and feeling the natural stability of the body as you continue to allow it to settle right here, right now. Really allowing the bones to come into alignment and to carry the weight of the body so that all the muscles of the shoulders and the chest can just become soft and wide. And even the eyes and the mouth can become soft and relaxed. And then finding one part of the body that feels steady and at ease. Just placing the attention there, allowing it to rest on one part of the body. Just feeling whatever sensations arise. And the key to this kind of meditation, this relaxation without falling asleep, is the attention, the quality of attention on the body. Last week we were leading retreat and it occurred to me that I probably haven't mentioned in a while why I do 2 bells. And it's because the first bell is just to tell you that in a moment, we're going to change to something else. And then you have that moment to shift. So you don't have to feel like you have to jump when the bell rings and be ready for the next thing. You have a moment between the first bell and the second bell, which means ready for the next thing. So just so you know why I do it that way. And so yes, so I'm going to shift now to the Dhamma talk. And as usual, I'll start with homage to the Buddha and the Triple Gem. And if you know it, you're welcome to chant along with your mic muted. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. One of the aspects of the early Buddhist teachings that I really appreciate the most is the way that they talk about the integration between the body and the mind, and between the body, mind, and the environment. So we touched upon this a little bit last weekend during the retreat, and it's a theme that I like to come back to again and again, because I feel that for many of us, finding that way of relating to both the body and the mind skillfully, and to understanding how it is integrated into the environment is difficult. It's something that's easy to lose touch with. So I want to talk about a framework called the 5 aggregates, or khandhas in Pali, or skandhas in Sanskrit is the word that is being translated as aggregates, or it means literally heaps, piles of stuff. And so right away you get a sense for what this teaching might be about. But it's a really, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of suttas in which the Buddha and Dhammadipa and Venerable Sariputta and all of the awakened folks that we hear teaching in the suttas are teaching about. It is a framework that is really fundamental to the practice of Buddhism. And yet it is also one that I think that oftentimes, even if we understand it intellectually, we may not know well how to practice with it. So today I want to speak about a sutta. It's a fairly well-known sutta in some circles, and it's called the Lump of Foam Sutta, Lump of Foam. And this is from the Linked Discourses, chapter 22, number 95, for anybody who wants to pull out the big books and have a look. Samyutta Nikaya, SN, Samyutta Nikaya, 2295. And in fact, so I'm going to use the translation by Bhante Sujato, although I think Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi is also fairly similar. And so the Buddha in this particular sutta gives a series of similes for each one of the 5 aggregates. So just to say what they are, so we have rupa. Rupa is the Pali word. Rupa, which means form, and it means our physical form, literally earth, water, fire, and air, right? So we are carbon-based beings. That's the earth part of us. You might think of it that way. Every cell imbued with earth element. And water, right? We are actually more than 50% water. They say babies have more water actually than than us dried out older adults. But a large part water, right? In every cell of the body. And then fire, so fire representing the warmth. We are literally, these bodies are heat-producing machines, right? We call it burning calories, right? We take in nutrients and we burn them up by chemical processes. That's our fire element. And then you have the air element. So literally, again, oxygen, right? In every cell of the body, oxygen throughout. Nowadays, we know that oxygen is necessary actually for your muscles to work well, right? So these 4 elements are the form body, or the rupa. And then, and things that emanate from there, like waste and tears and, all kinds of other things, smells. So, and then you have the other 4 aggregates. So the other 4 aggregates are mental phenomena. So you have Vedana. Vedana means, I like the translation of feeling tone. So it's a pre-verbal sense of whether something is okay or not okay, or kind of neutral. Yeah. Usually we say it's on a scale of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Everything from the most blissed out of your gourd to the most agonizing, and everything in between, right? That's the Vedana, the feeling tone of a thing. And it's very much like a gut feeling. It's a pre-verbal sense. And then you have perception. Perception is much more related to words. It's a way we identify a thing. Sanya is a Pali word. And then also related to memory because of that, because of the language factor. And then you have sankharas. So sankhara is a complicated word. It has many different meanings in the suttas. In this particular framework, I like to think of it as responses and reactions. Bhante Sujato likes to use the word choices, but I actually think that's too limited. It's too narrow for what we mean by sankharas. It also includes papancha, or like elaborations. Sankharas is also the clinging aspect of the aggregates. So we talk about the clinging, which produces dukkha, which produces suffering or insatisfactoriness in our lives. That is a sankhara. So the sankharas hold on to, you could think of them as like appropriating all the other ones to create the sense of self. And then you have vijnana. Vijnana is consciousness. And consciousness in this scheme, it's I don't want to get too deep into it, but what I will say is this: consciousness in this scheme could be thought of as both a wave, both something with some continuity, and individual moments of consciousness that are related to our sense experience. So we'll see a little bit more about how that works in a minute when we talk about these similes. So I have these great similes. So the Buddha says that this body, rupa, is like a lump of foam. That's where the title of the sutta comes from. So he says, if he's using the example of the river Ganges, and he says, if you were looking at the river and you see a lump of foam out there, you would think, oh, that thing is kind of insubstantial. It's empty. It's kind of hollow. It doesn't have a lot of solidity to it. It's going to disappear quite shortly, right? It's not a long-lived thing. And in the same way, he says our bodies are like a lump of foam. So think about that for a second. This body is like that thing on top of your latte or on top of your dishwater or in the bottom of the shower. It has that much substantiality to it, which is not much, right? Not much. And it doesn't retain its shape very well. To take the metaphor a little bit literally. So our bodies are like a lump of foam. It's pretty hard to get too super excited about that, right? Or thinking like you're really going to make it look nice. It's just a lump of foam. Like that thing that doesn't last long enough on top of your coffee. So that's the first simile. And then he says, Vedana, these feeling tones that we have. So these feeling tones are very, very strong, kind of pushing us toward wanting things or toward aversion, pushing things away, or toward wanting to ignore. So usually we say with neutral feeling tones, we just kind of want to ignore those things. They don't really like give us enough charge to pay attention to. So the Buddha says, Vedana is like a bubble on a puddle. So if you see that there's a puddle or a pond and it's raining, and sometimes these little bubbles will form, right? Just for a second, there's a little bubble on top of the puddle, and then it bursts, right? That's the feeling tone. So the most excruciating thing you could think of, or the most blissed out of your gourd thing you can think of, or the most boring, bland thing you can think of, it's all just like that. It's all just like that little bubble. Again, it's pretty hard to get super worked up about it, right? That bubble, because you know it's going to be gone in an instant. This is, in fact, one of the most important learnings, right? The learning of impermanence of things, right? One of the beautiful stories of the Dhamma, the very first transmission of the Dhamma between the Buddha and Venerable Kondanya, who wasn't quite venerable yet at that point, but becomes venerable by virtue of his understanding. And he says, all that is of the nature of to arise is of the nature to cease. And the Buddha says, he got it. He got it. That was his first stage, his first step toward awakening. It sounds simple, it sounds obvious, and yet think about whether you treat your feeling tones as being like a bubble, right? So then you have, the next one is perception. Perception. So we think about how we identify a thing. You see something and you think to yourself, flor, or flare, or flower, or whatever language, whatever flower and whatever language comes up for you. And this is my favorite of all the similes. The Buddha says that it is like a mirage. All perception is like a mirage. So here now, I think that my share screen is working now. And so I want to show you a photo of a mirage. Excellent. Can everybody see that? Yeah. So this is a photo of the desert in Australia. I think it's called Nulbara Desert. I'm not entirely certain. But what you see here is you see the sand and the trees in the distance, and you see this here, maybe hopefully you guys can see my cursor there, just below the trees, this stuff that looks like water, right? This shine. But that is a mirage. There's no water there. It's just the presence of the heat and the way, a certain way that the light is reflected toward our eyes. And the mind understands it in a way that isn't quite accurate. So we see it and it looks like water, but there's actually no water there. It's just a mirage. And in the same way, when we have perception, it doesn't mean that there isn't something there that is being perceived. It means that we take it to be something other than what it is. We take it to be something that's more substantial than what it is. Or we take it to be something that relates to us, that we can appropriate as a self. Mine, not mine. Good for me, bad for me. Right? We put it immediately into all that context. So perception is like a mirage. It's like that water that's not actually really there, the way that we understand the world, until we have wisdom. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to tell you the other two similes that the Buddha uses for the aggregates. So going on, he says, sankharas. So these kinds of responses and reactions. He says they are like the leaves of a plantain tree. So I'm originally from South Florida, Miami area of South Florida, and from a Latino family. My dad is from Colombia. And so we had bought our first little family house, and he wanted to put a plantain tree in the front yard. Great, because that's what grows in Colombia, so it would feel like home. So he plants this plantain tree in the front yard, and he waters it because, you know, it's a tropical kind of plant. Plantains, are like bananas. Banana is a particular kind of banana. Anyway, my dad waters and waters a tree too much, a little bit too much. So the leaves, they rotted. And then what happened when the leaves rotted is that the whole plant just falls over. Why? Because there's no core. There's no trunk. It's just a leaf on top of a leaf on top of a leaf. That's what gives it this firmness. That's what makes it stand up. And in the same way, our reactions and responses to the world feel much more substantial because they wrap onto one another. They are related to one another, right? We think one thought and then we think the next thought and then we think the next thought, and suddenly we have a whole story and we have a very solid feeling of understanding and response and reaction to the world. But it's all just that. It's all just one thought after the next thought. It doesn't have the substantiality that we think it does. No core, just the thoughts. And then finally, consciousness. And he says that the simile for consciousness is that consciousness is like a magic trick. Again, it's like some activity, something's happening there, but the guy didn't actually pull a quarter out of your ear, right? That's not really what happened. It might look like that, but that's not actually what happened. Yeah. And in the same way, the Buddha says that we misunderstand consciousness. We take consciousness to be something permanent or something that we own. The self is always appropriating this consciousness. But actually, in another sutta, what the Buddha says very clearly is that consciousness and the body are like two bundles of reeds. They just kind of lean up on each other. They require each other to be present. But in the absence of one, the other one just falls away. Right? So consciousness as a magician's trick, or like, again, this idea of the mirage or the bubble, very insubstantial, very, very brief, fleeting, not what we think. It's not what it looks like. This body, this mind. And he says, so what do we do with the aggregates? And this is the important part. This is one of the main parts that we want to talk about. So what do we do with this? So we have this teaching that these things are so insubstantial. And he says, so a person with clear eyes, right? That's another metaphor, would see it, contemplate it, examine it carefully, and see that all of these five things are, as I said, empty, hollow, insubstantial. And having seen that, then they become disillusioned. So now disillusionment has a kind of negative connotation in English, but if we break it down literally, it means that. It means to lose your delusions about life, right? It means to relinquish wrong view. That's what disillusionment means when we see that translation of that word, nibbida. Nibbida is the Pali word. And it means relinquishing our mistaken understanding about the world in favor of a more authentic, accurate, sincere study. Ah, yes, no, this is really what's here. This is really how it is. So when that happens, right, then the wanting, this kind of feeling of being pushed and pulled all the time by these things, by trying to defend whatever you think needs to be protected, or by trying to shape it up in such a way, control it in such a way, right? All of that push-pull loses its power over you. It's not that you don't have feelings anymore. Of course, you still have feelings, right? You don't become a stone by actually having insight, but you do actually cease to be pushed around by the feelings, driven by the desire to make it be something other than what it is, because you can understand why it is what it is. The conditions are such that it is like this, or the conditions are such that it is like that. And you don't tell yourself, and it's interesting, if you really, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we'd be surprised, you might be surprised how often you tell yourself, it's always going to be like that, right? And yet the Buddha says, no, there is nothing that is always going to be like that. Literally nothing. Not the sun, not the moon, certainly not this body and this mind. Right? But it does work according to certain principles. And as I often say, knowing that we can change the content of our lives, the specific parts of the story, the specific types of experiences, we can do those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of choices that we can and should actually make. In fact, I would say most of the teachings around ethics and morality in Buddhism are about that, are about making the kinds of choices that we can make to shift our experience in a more positive, skillful, wholesome way. Put the conditions for a better future actually into place, literally, by the forces of karma. However, we can also see that there are attributes to our experience which are principles. They work the way they work, right? Like impermanence, like the function of karma, like the fact of this body falling apart and coming together all the time, right? A certain lack of control that we have, a certain lack of ability to shape it. Those things, if we try to change them, that is a recipe for suffering, right? That is a recipe for more and more resistance to the reality of life. And the Dhamma isn't about resistance to the reality of life. It's about the opposite of that, right? It's about understanding the reality of it and making that will bring us peace with it. Ah, yes, I see. This can change and this cannot. And we can make our peace with that. And we can begin to understand that the path actually depends on that impermanence. The path to enlightenment actually depends on this process of things ceasing and arising, right? We need certain karma to work itself out. We need the negative results to finish up, and we want the positive results to also finish up in the sense of like bringing those positive supports for the path into our lives, right? So we rely on this process of this body and mind being subject to arising and ceasing in order for the path to unfold. And the interesting part is that, yes, there is, you could say, you know, there's a long running debate, many thousands, probably since the Buddha's time, actually, about whether enlightenment is spontaneous or whether it is a gradual process, right? And the fact is that if you look at the way that it's described, it's actually both. It's a gradual process in the sense that we do the work of putting the factors of awakening into place. We do the work of mindfulness, investigation, effort, joy, right? Tranquility, samadhi, concentration, equanimity. We walk the path of cultivating those factors. But then there's also all of the karmic conditions that are present in any given moment, right? So those things have to come together. Those are the things that are outside of what we can do, outside of the choices that we can make. So there is also an attribute of relinquishing, of knowing that we have to be subject to the principles. And that's actually what brings together that moment. It's not just a matter of choice. If it was just a matter of choice, then it's a recipe. We just tell you, read this book, do that amount of meditation, and boom, you're there, right? So we rely on the principles to do their part, so to speak, in order for the path to unfold. And that's why the Buddha is telling us this. It's not to break you down. It's not to say, oh, it's all useless. It's actually the opposite. It's to say, look, things are changing. So you have the possibility to work within this process to actually understand it fully. And so enlightenment is not far away. Enlightenment is accessible in every single moment, because the things that you want to wake up to are right here in every single moment. But perhaps there's still some unfolding to do because I don't see anybody starting to glow. Or maybe it wouldn't look so glowy, who knows? But the beauty of the sutta is that the Buddha says, by this study, by this clear observation and coming to know that form is like a lump of foam and feeling is like a bubble and perception is like a mirage and reactions are like a plantain, the heart or the trunk of a plantain tree, which doesn't exist. And consciousness is like a magic trick. By knowing these, however you contemplate them, however you examine them carefully, they are still empty when you look at them closely. Such is this process. Those who examine the aggregates like this with situational awareness. So I'm at the end of my time, but I will just say situational awareness. That's Bhante Sujata's translation of Yoniso Manasikara. It means wise attention or thorough attention to the origin. Yoni, it means womb, literally a woman's womb. So it's like that. It's like attention to the origins of things. So an energetic practitioner should examine the aggregates like this with wise attention and mindfulness by day or by night, and they make a refuge for themselves. You make a refuge for yourself by knowing that these things can be observed, these things can be known. This body, this mind is actually built in such a way as to reveal to you the wisdom of all things. So thank you for your kind attention today.